Greetings. It is May 1st, 2018. This is Dr. Stephen Jones of God's Kingdom Ministries giving you an early battle report of the Jericho War that is being fought from April 30 to May 6. As I said in my previous video, this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread following the second Passover in 2018. As such, it correlates with the Battle of Jericho, which Israel fought for 7 days immediately after keeping the Feast of Passover in the book of Joshua. Some have said that the new moon was sighted in Jerusalem a day later than what is determined by the modern Jewish calendar. If that is correct, then the timing of unleavened bread might be a day later, from May 1st to 7th, rather than from April 30 to May 6. Actual events may prove which is correct, so be watchful. There are two specific dates that seem to stand out this week. The most obvious one is the last day of unleavened bread, which correlates with the downfall of Jericho on the seventh day. That day would be either May 6 or 7. The other specific watch date is May 2 or 3. One of these dates falls on the seventh day of the second month on the Hebrew calendar, either May 2 or 3. Why is this date important as a watch date? Well, that takes a bit of explanation. In God's original calendar, based on the start of the creation days, Rosh Hashana was the first day of creation and the start of the year. This calendar was the predominant one for nearly 2,500 years until God changed it in the time of Moses. Yes, God has changed the calendar before. 2 weeks before Israel's first Passover in Egypt, Moses was observing the first crescent moon in late March. This was the start of the seventh month since Rosh Hashana the previous September. So we read in Exodus 12, verses 1 and 2. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you." So instead of that month being the seventh month, it now became the first month. In other words, that same evening when Moses and Aaron observed the first crescent moon, it became the evening of the first day of the first month. That is, New Year's Eve. They got this revelation on what became New Year's Eve of that new calendar. From then on, Israel essentially had two distinct calendars. The first, which began in September at the end of the growing season, was the start of their Sabbath year every seventh year. But insofar as their yearly feast days were concerned, Passover always occurred in the first month in late March or early April, depending on when the first crescent moon was sighted. That is how Israel got the confusing calendar, where Rosh Hashana, New Year's Day, was the first day of the seventh month. How can you have New Year's Eve on the first day of a seventh month? Would it not follow that it should be on the first month? Well, it originally was. It's confusing to those who are unfamiliar with the biblical calendars. But since I did not invent those calendars myself, I have no power to change them. I can only hope to explain them clearly to you and hope that you are not confused by the end of this. Okay, having said that, we know that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, often called the Torah. When Moses dated events that occurred in the book of Genesis, it is not clear if he was using the calendar that was in use during those early days, or if he was using the new calendar that had been revealed to him. A good example is found in Genesis 7, 11, and 12. It says, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights." Now our question is this: was Moses dating this and speaking of the second month from Rosh Hashana, which was the way of reckoning on the old calendar during the events that actually occurred in the time of Noah? If so, the flood would have begun in October. Or did Moses tell us that the flood began in May, which was the second month on the new calendar that had been revealed to him? Which calendar was he using? Moses did not explain, so it is difficult to know for sure. Nonetheless, that very silence makes it possible for us to use both calendars for purposes of understanding prophecy. You see, the seventh day of the second month in 2018, by the new calendar, is either May 2 or 3. That's tomorrow or the next day, Tuesday or Wednesday. It happens to fall in the time of unleavened bread for the second Passover this year. That is this week. Now in Matthew 24, 37 to 39, we read, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For in those days which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be." In other words, the flood began on the 17th day of the second month, he says. If Moses was dating the start of Noah's flood by the new calendar that had been revealed to him in Exodus 12:2, then we could say that May 2 or 3, 2018 correlates with the start of the flood. For this reason, some are saying that the rapture will occur at or near this time. They say that the tribulation is beginning, and their hope is to be raptured away before the start of the tribulation. They even say that Christ will come this week. Well, of course, I do not believe that Christ will be coming this week, at least not in the way that they believe. The concept of the rapture itself is based on a fundamental lack of understanding of the Feast of Tabernacles, and that's where most of them make their mistake. In my view, Christ must come in the middle of Tabernacles, which has been set for late September or October each year. So frankly, I'm not expecting to see Christ return this week. Nonetheless, as always, I realize that my understanding may not be correct. So I will always be prepared for his coming, regardless of the time of year. In fact, you don't have to have the date right in your mind in order to be ready for his coming. Just be ready all the time. And that's the best advice anyone can give you. But having said that, what might we expect in the next few days if this correlates indeed to the start of Noah's flood? The most likely scenario that we will see is that the Israeli state will enter into a time of war. One might call it tribulation. All wars are tribulation on some level. So if we look at the world news today, is there any indication of a war brewing between the Israeli state and some other country? Well, yes. Yesterday, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, second Passover, that is, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel gave a PowerPoint presentation in which he put in large letters on the screen, "Iran lied." He then showed off nuclear plans on computer disks and papers, proving that Iran has been developing nuclear weaponry from a base in Syria, continuing its program ever since the so-called Obama agreement with Iran. That base in Syria, by the way, was destroyed recently by U.S. missiles this past month. President Trump used the so-called gas attack, which probably didn't happen, or if it did, it was probably done by the rebels and not the Assad regime. But Trump used the so-called gas attack as an excuse to destroy Iran's nuclear facility in Syria. That is where most of the missiles were sent. Only a few were sent to destroy some chemical factories in Syria. So at the present time, we see Israel in a virtual state of war with Iran. Netanyahu warned the Iranians that if they tried to fight back, the Israelis would retaliate further, and of course blame the Iranians for starting the war. That's the way it always works. You start the war, and if anybody fights back, then they're the ones that start the war. That's the way it works. It's a propaganda war. Anyway, tensions are running very high now, and we might well see an overt war occur in the next few days. Keep in mind that ancient Persia is today known as Iran. Persia was the country that overthrew Babylon. I have understood since the 1980s that someday Persia would be involved and be a key figure in the overthrow of Mystery Babylon. Remember also that Jericho was an Old Testament prophetic type of Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation. That ties it all to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is where we are right now. Is it a coincidence that a war with Iran or Persia seems imminent during the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread this week? Is it a coincidence that the start of Noah's flood, which took them all away, was dated the 17th day of the second month during the time of unleavened bread this week? This is definitely a time to be watchful and to understand world events as they unfold. At the same time, we need to understand the positive side to Noah's flood. Yes, there is a positive side. The original flood defined the time when the breath of life, or spirit, was removed from all flesh. Genesis 7:22 says, "Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life died." The Hebrew word for spirit is ruach, which also means breath or wind. In other words, the flood drowned everyone, removing their breath. But there is a second flood coming in our time, because we live in a time described in Matthew 24 as the days of Noah. That depicts judgment upon the wicked ones. But God also prophesied that the glory of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. In other words, a flood of the Holy Spirit is coming as well. That is the positive side of this flood. The positive side of His Spirit is designed to put the Spirit of God back into man, which had been removed during the time of the original flood of Noah. So if we see war break out this week, we will understand that war to be on the negative side of prophecy. But at the same time, we should look for the start of the positive flood, in which the Spirit of God is poured out upon all flesh. These are things to watch for in the coming days. So stay tuned for further developments in future videos. God bless.